Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Blues Brothers podcast, a show that discusses all things football with plenty of debates and conversation. And joining me this evening, I'm delighted to announce that Premier League reporter and assistant producer for Premier League Productions, Louise Coles, joins me. Rebecca, thanks for joining me on the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'd like to start by asking all their guests kind of what team they follow and how they ended up following that team. You were telling me just before we came on that you've got a little bit of an interesting story. So if you'd just like to kind of recap that again for me, that would be great.
It's very controversial. As I said earlier, I grew up in football from pretty much day one. My dad is an ex-goalkeeper, now goalkeeping coach. He basically, when I was kind of born, he was going into being just finishing being a goalkeeper and going into being a goalkeeper coach. So his first job was at Southampton. So that was my first Premier League game, was when the last game was played at the Dell, when Matt Le Tissier scored that last minute winner. So I've kind of grown up supporting every team he's been at. He went to Portsmouth with Harry Redknapp after that. Shortly after, a couple of years on, we're looking at West Ham with Avram Grant. So it's kind of been a business as well as supporting for me, you know, kind of supporting the roof over your head as such, because football's one of those games you can be high one day and kind of, you know, sacked the next pretty much. So it's always been one of those things where I've always kind of, every club he's been at, I've always kind of looked out for their results after he's left the club. But yeah, I've supported quite a few teams over the years.
And in terms of that, to push you for like sort of kind of your main one that you're kind of following at the moment, who would you say that is?
Definitely Southampton.
Yeah.
It's always been Southampton, really. I actually said this to someone the other day because that was my first game. It was kind of the first team that I was kind of always interested about. I mean, I was obsessed with James Beattie as a kid. I was just fascinated with him as a striker. So I think it's always been Southampton deep down.
And just staying on the theme of Southampton, how do you feel they've started the season this season? Obviously, they're without a win still. They've lost a couple of key players over the summer window. That's kind of become a traditional theme with Southampton over the years, losing their top players. Obviously, this summer they lost Danny Ings and Yannick Vestergaard. Brought in a few players, young, exciting players, the likes of Tino Livramento from Chelsea, who's had a really bright start. Armstrong's come in for a lot of money from the Championship, hasn't quite found his feet yet. How do you see them doing this season?
I think they're just still trying to gel as a team. I think Danny Ings was a complete shock move. No one saw it coming. I think Adam Armstrong had a really good start in his first game, obviously got his debut goal against Everton. I just think they're still trying to gel at the moment, and I think they'll get there. I can't see them, you know, being in the top half of the table this season, but I can definitely see them surviving and trying to kind of get kind of momentum going in the next few games. I can think. I've spoken to Ralph Hasenhüttl at the Premier League a few times. He's a really, really good manager, and you know, he's got all these ideas from the academy to the first team. Like, he knows exactly what he wants. He's just still trying to kind of get that fit right, I think.
Yeah, in terms of the manager, he's got quite a good reputation. Are you surprised that Southampton have managed to keep hold of him for as long as they have so far? Because he has been linked with a few kind of bigger jobs, but he's obviously still there. Can you see Southampton being able to keep hold of him for a few more seasons?
I think they can, without a doubt. I think he loves Southampton, but also he's kind of embedded himself in the club. He's like I said a minute ago, he's kind of made this playbook where the players coming through the academy have got this kind of way of he wants to play for when they reach the first team. So it's not too much, you know, once they get into the first team, it's not too much teaching them of how he wants them to play tactically. So he's kind of, you know, embedded himself in the club to where I think he's quite settled, and he really wants the club, and he wants to take the club into winning cups and, you know, and doing a little bit more in the Premier League. But with the Premier League, you know, week in, week out, it just changes. You know, every week you kind of think, oh, you know, Chelsea might win the title, and then they bring in Ronaldo and you think, no, Man United are probably going to win the league this year. It changes every week. So I just think it's just you can't write it really.
Yeah, very true. You just never know what's going to happen with managers, with players alike as well. And just moving on to the Premier League as a whole, this season it seems to be very open in kind of the race for the title. You could possibly argue that there's 4 teams that could win it. You know, Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, and Manchester United. It's all kind of very even. We've had a great transfer window. You know, the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo turning, Lukaku coming to Chelsea for big money. Obviously, Jack Grealish to City, etc. How do you see the title race going this season? And do you think this could be one of the most exciting seasons we've had in a long time?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, you got Chelsea that are top of the table at the moment. Last season when Thomas Tuchel come in, and obviously Frank Lampard left, you kind of thought, I'm just not sure that, you know, he's going to manage to turn this team round, because obviously the players loved Frank Lampard. But then you've got Liverpool, you know, the game against Man City on Sunday was exactly what we want in the Premier League. You've even got Brighton trying to get into the top 6 as well. You know, a few years ago, you had Leicester City winning the Premier League. So I think it could really be one of those seasons where, you know, we don't see it coming really.
Yeah, I think it's going to go all the way to it's going to go the distance for sure. I don't think we're going to see it where a team kind of runs away a bit like Liverpool did a couple of years ago. City didn't really get out of third gear last season, kind of cruised it by 12 points. I think it's going to be a lot closer this season, and those matches against the other so-called big teams are going to make a big difference. But you know, in terms of you know, who you think might win it, if you had to pick someone now, who do you feel at this kind of early stage is like just a little bit ahead of the others? I know that's quite a difficult question.
Really tough. I generally think it could be Chelsea. I just think there's something in them this season that I don't know. There's just something there that seems to be gelling well this season. I mean,
Yeah,
towards the end of last season, but I think this season there just seems to be something going on there that you kind of think, okay, they could win it this season.
yeah. I mean, as a Chelsea fan, you know, I think we've got big expectations for this season. Obviously, as you touched on, Thomas Tuchel come in January, weren't really sure what to expect. Obviously, you know, divided opinions on whether Lampard should have been sacked or not. I think at a club like Chelsea, you go on a run like that, I don't think it matters who you are. You know that you're going to be replaced. And Tuchel come in, you know, he's done well in his career, well at Dortmund, did well at PSG. Ultimately, couldn't get them the Champions League, but did get them to their first final. I think it was just going to come in and just consolidate things. I don't think anyone expected, you know, that defense to be transformed the way it was. The same players that were leaking goals like 2 or 3 every week, we suddenly weren't letting any. And I think that just goes down to show how good of a coach he is. And the Champions League was kind of like just the icing on the cake for the season, really. But this season now we've added Lukaku into the mix, which was missing from last season. We just need someone that can put the goals in. You know, we started the season well. I was at the City game. We did get played off the park there, unfortunately. They were outstanding on the day. But I think the start we've had with Arsenal, Spurs, Liverpool, City all in the first 7 games, to be topped by a point, I think is a great performance from the team. So yeah, I'd like to think Chelsea can do it, but as you say, there's so many twists and turns. A lot depends on injuries. Obviously, it's African Nations Cup in January as well. Chelsea losing Mendy, Liverpool will be without Salah and Mane, so I think that hands a bit of an advantage to Manchester City. And then obviously all the injuries as well, fitness concerns and stuff. If you can keep your players fit through a season, I think as a top team, you're almost halfway there. But kind of moving on then, Rebecca, to kind of your job as such now. How long have you been kind of working as a reporter in the Premier League and assistant producer?
About 3 seasons ago, I got a promotion to assistant producer. It had been kind of a long time coming. I've been plugging away for years and kind of waiting for the opportunity and my chance. It kind of came along also because not only did a job came up, but there was a senior producer who she's actually gone to Sky Sports this season to head up the YSL. But, you know, it's just getting someone to believe in you and what you could do. So I applied for the job. I told her, Nia Wynne Thomas, who's at Sky Sports now, that, you know, I wanted to be an assistant producer, but also wanted to kind of be a stroke reporter as well, so that I could, work along all the departments in Premier League and hope to kind of bridge that kind of multi-platform that we have. So after becoming assistant producer, I got to go on shoots and the shoots at Premier League, we put, the Premier League put up 20 players a week to kind of preview the games. So we go along to the shoots and we kind of, we ask match preview questions, but, also we cut features alongside these interviews as well. So they could be fun features about, goalkeeping and, the mentality of a goalkeeper maybe. But these are all for broadcasters overseas. So you unfortunately don't get to see a lot of this in the UK, which is a real shame because the content is unbelievable. So yeah, I've been assistant producer for, I'd say, a season, and then bridged it into a reporter the last 2 seasons, which has just been, it's an absolute dream of a job, and it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's great fun and certainly a great job to have as well. So how did you kind of get into that producing, that reporting side of things? Did you kind of study sort of media at university or anything like that? Because there's a lot of people that will be listening that, would like to kind of do a similar job to what you do. So kind of what sort of route did you go down to get into the business to start with?
I studied journalism at Kingston University. I've always, since I've been at school, I've always known that I've wanted to be a football reporter of some kind. So as soon as I could be on work experience, that was what I was doing. I started work experience at several football clubs. I actually, my first work experience was actually at Southampton. I went on to do it at Portsmouth and West Ham. And I think after I did that, I knew that there was something there that I really wanted to work in football. That was really going to be the dream job for me. So I went to university for 3 years. I studied journalism. And then when I came out, it was kind of like, there wasn't a lot around, to be honest. So I ended up freelancing for several newspapers as kind of a sport journalist, which was amazing. But I just knew that I kind of, I wanted to be in the TV side of things, because the journalism side, it kind of got a lot of it was very much online. They weren't sending a lot of reporters out to press conferences and interviews, and which was a real shame. So I basically applied for a job as a production assistant at IMG and got the job, and that's how I got my foot in the door in the TV industry. And then after working as a production assistant, which is a lot of admin and shoot planning, I took the step up as a production coordinator, which is a little bit of the same, but a little bit more responsibility. And after then, I kind of, you have to just get really speaking to people around the workplace and telling them what you want to do. And, can I shadow? I think shadowing is, a real opportunity to kind of see how it kind of works and how it can work for you. But on the side, I continued to freelance and still write and try and get on shoots and do different bits and pieces and even interviews and stuff. I would spend my time trying to, interview my dad on different bits and pieces just to kind of practice, because it's all well kind of saying, oh, I'd love to, interview a footballer. When you sit down in front of them, you've really got to be confident, if that makes sense, even though they're a human being still, but you've really got to be confident. And also, as a woman in football, you've really got to know your stuff. Because if they throw a curveball in there, a tactical kind of, a thing of the game, you've really got to know that area of stuff and be able to communicate with them on that, or something else. So yeah, that's really where it came from. And then after I kind of worked as a production coordinator for a season in the Premier League, I managed to take a step across to the editorial side, which is what they call it in most companies. As an editorial assistant, I worked on several kind of shows for the Premier League and learned really what the Premier League was about. They broadcast several shows across the world, fantasy football, like a headline makers show, a Premier League Today show, which is, all the news across the Premier League day to day. So I kind of learned as how it kind of worked across the Premier League, which was really important. And then I got the job on another department under Nia Wynne Thomas. And yeah, it just kind of grew from there really. And I continued to shadow on other departments and reporters that were going out before I managed to make my kind of debut as such. And it, shadowing, I think, is a massive thing now in the workplace. It's just, it's a bit like work experience, but at the same time, you learn so much from it and you really gain from it. But also I kind of watched a lot of YouTube stuff of other people reporting, especially watching people like Kelly Summers and Laura Woods on, Kelly Summers on a Saturday morning and Laura Woods on a Sunday on Sunday football on Sky. I think it's important to watch stuff like that as well, because you pick up stuff of how you kind of want your interviews to be like, because you don't want to be the same as someone else. You kind of want to have your own unique selling point.
Yeah, that's just a quick question on that. How do you, obviously there's a lot of interviewers, there's a lot of people that will kind of do the same thing that you do. How do you then how difficult is it to develop your own interviewing style, and how because players will get interviewed all the time, they'll be asked probably the same kind of questions all the time. How do you kind of make an interview a little bit different so they don't feel like they're coming in, sitting down, going to have to answer the same set of questions again kind of thing?
All my research, I dive into everything. I listen to podcasts about the players. I'll dive into their social media to the point where I'm scrolling years later to see what they've been up to, what they're into, because I think it's important to really get to know them as a human being outside of football as well, because these players, they have a lot of interests outside football. They love to play golf, some of them love cars and kind of stuff like that. Like they are a person outside of football. So I also think it's really important sometimes to kind of bring that kind of aspect, and that side out of them, to talking about what they really love. Because, talking about football every day, it does get a bit, samey. And like you say, they get asked the same questions all the time. What can you expect from the game this weekend?
Yeah.
Like that, you can see them sometimes just switching off when you ask them stuff, but you have to ask them stuff like that because they need to preview that next game. But I think with our features as well that we produce at the Premier League, we are trying to just bring that bit of fun out of them and a side to them that the viewers don't really see.
Yeah, I think it's important for people seem to forget so quickly that these guys they are just normal humans. They just kind of are very good at something that's massively in the public eye. In terms of kind of preparation for interviews with players, with managers, etc., how much preparation do you put into an interview? Like, will you sort of do a lot? You mentioned you do quite a lot of research. Will you kind of, do it days before, or some interviews can you kind of get away with a little bit less preparation time?
It kind of depends when the interview comes up. I normally start prepping as soon as I'm kind of assigned the interview. So I'll kind of start, on their Instagram, on their Twitter, kind of have a look through that. I'll go through stuff on, the newspapers and bits and pieces and see what, the last game they played and, maybe they scored a goal in the interview. I'll listen to maybe a couple of podcasts they've been on. A lot of them have been on like Peter Crouch's podcast.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So it's always interesting because then you get a bit of an insight of stories from the changing room and what they're like in the changing room and what they're like behind closed doors, because sometimes when they come into these interviews they do tend to shut down a little bit because they're frightened to say something that might not be perceived as what it should be. And so it's kind of just really getting to know them. So I will start my prep as soon as I can, really, and I'll keep building on it over the next couple of days until the interview comes up, because also news changes really quickly. They put stories on their Instagram that you might have missed, and also it's always a nice talking point to say, oh, I saw what you posted on your Instagram the other day and it was really funny or something. For instance, Matty Cash, he's a bit of a nutter at Aston Villa. People might know. He's really good fun in the interviews as well. So my first interview with him, he was fresh at Aston Villa, fresh in the Premier League, probably a bit nervous as well. So we kind of, I said to him, oh, I know you used to work in a toy shop in Windsor. Like, what was that like? And he just completely relaxed. And he was saying, oh, yeah, I used to get the Nerve guns out in the toy shop. Brilliant. And you just kind of saw him completely change, because he kind of thought, oh, this is not too bad. Like, it's, because also their first kind of interview when they join a club, and especially in the Premier League, they are a bit daunted by it, and you can see it in their face. So when you kind of like just learn a little bit more about them and you maybe mention it, they do tend to settle down quite a lot, I find.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of breaking down those initial barriers, and then once you've done that, first questions out of the way, it kind of flows quite nicely. Have you ever been? I mean, I know I certainly would be if I was in your position. Do you ever get nervous about interviewing certain players? Because it's obviously like you watch a lot of players. You might idolize some of them as you've grown up, and they might have scored some important goals for your team. Do you ever get nerves before an interview? And if so, how do you kind of deal with that to make sure they don't come through when you're actually carrying it out?
When I was younger, I did work experience at Portsmouth, and this was back in the 2008 team. So that was the team of David James and Jermaine Defoe and Peter Crouch. So
That's a great side, that, yeah.
It was unbelievable. My dad was goalkeeping coach at the club at the time, and I remember before I started my work experience, he said to me, "Whatever you do, just don't get starstruck. Whatever you do, just be completely normal." And he kind of reminded me that they are human beings. And he was like, that's the most important thing. Whatever you do, just act like they're your mate. And that's what I did. I remember interviewing David James straight off the training pitch and just pretending that I was his mate. And he played along with it, to be honest. And it kind of puts you at ease, because you kind of don't look at it as an interview. It's kind of a chat with someone down the pub, essentially. But it's, a little bit more professional, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I started off very nervous, and I did develop a really bad stutter at one time as well, which I just couldn't get my head around. But I used to spend evenings kind of practicing, and even my questions, I would keep repeating them and asking them in different ways till I was really comfortable with what I was saying. So now when I do go into an interview the night before, I do that same prep. I read the questions. I take an iPad in with me, but I do try to make it flow. I do try to not be looking down at the iPad too much, and to really try and listen to what they're saying and really engage with them. Because sometimes when I was younger and doing interviews, I remember, taking, well, I didn't really have an iPad, not so long ago. So I remember taking my laptop in with me and trying to read, questions word for word. And, listening to the interviews back and thinking, God, this sounds really, really silly. Like, I don't need to do this. But you find that the player also relaxes when you're just sitting back and having a conversation. So I think what made me more nervous was reading the questions out word for word, and rather than just letting the interview flow as such. So I think over time it got a lot better for me as, I kind of relaxed, and, also doing more research I find helps, because you've got all this stuff in your head that you really want to get across. And especially with a Premier League interview, we only kind of get like a 10-minute kind of sit down with them. There's a lot to get in 10 minutes. So you kind of have to really make sure that, every question is going to be worth something that you can either make a feature of, or someone else can get some really nice match preview from.
Yeah, it's obviously important to make sure that content, I suppose, stands out in that limited period of time. I'd love to know, and I'm sure other people would like to know as well. When you interview players, obviously after a game or at the stadium, it's kind of different because it's live. But when you're going to sort of a interview that you've kind of pre-booked as such, do the questions get vetted by the club, etc., or is it kind of, as a reporter, do you kind of get free reign over that? Because I've always wondered whether the club checks them, whether you can't ask certain things. How does that kind of dynamic work?
I think it's kind of just being sensible about what you ask. I think, it's more a sense of just being sensible about what you ask about the game, and being, because when these players are coming off the pitch, you've got to remember, like I said before, they are human beings. Their work is on the pitch. So what you ask, you've just got to be, you've got to ask exactly what you have seen on that pitch, rather than trying to kind of get some kind of clever answer out of them, if that makes sense. So I think you've really just pretty much got to ask exactly what you've seen in that game, and really what they think, because that's what the viewer wants to know. The viewer wants to know what they think about that game. They want to know what they think about the red card, or what, why they haven't won the last few games. So I think it's just being really sensible with your questions sometimes, and kind of respecting both parties and whoever that you do get to interview after the game.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in terms of kind of players and managers you've interviewed, have you kind of had a favourite or one you've enjoyed doing most? And are there any kind of players, managers, etc., that you've not had the chance to interview yet that you would love to do so in future?
Do you know what? All the players are really, really good fun. Matty Cash is a massive favourite of mine.
Yeah.
He's just really chilled, laid back. And also, when you have a chat with him, you can just tell how much he loves his football. It's just really infectious. Jamie Vardy's another favourite one of mine as well.
I love him. He's class.
He's just brilliant. He's just brilliant. And some of the stuff he comes out with, you could literally sit with him all day and just talk football and stories and stuff, because, you know, some of the stuff he comes out with, you're just laughing most of the interview. I'm trying to think of another one as well. Emi Martinez is a lovely, lovely, lovely guy. The last couple of interviews I've done with him, we talk goalkeeping because he's just so passionate about it. So we talk about the mentality side of things, and we've talked about him saving penalties and stuff as well. And, you know, when you kind of sit down with a player and they absolutely love what they are doing, and especially like someone like Emi Martinez, who, you know, was really desperate to kind of make something at Arsenal and obviously had to get his move to Aston Villa in the end, to sit down with him at Aston Villa and, you know, you can see he's just grinning ear to ear because he's, you know, first choice goalkeeper now, and he's living his best life at Aston Villa as well. So to sit down with him and talk through, you know, goalkeeper masterclasses and stuff, it's just really refreshing. And that's kind of my favourite kind of interview, when the player really loves what they're doing on the pitch and they're kind of excited to tell you about it as such.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I saw you. Did you interview Martin Odegaard a few weeks ago? So, yeah, how was that? Because obviously he's a player that's, you know, still young, back in the Premier League again. Didn't quite work out for him at Real Madrid. What was he like as a person?
He's brilliant. He's absolutely lovely. I mean, when you kind of sit down with Martin Odegaard and you remember his price tag as well, you think, this is incredible. I'm sat in front of a £35 million player. That's when you really remember where you are, and you kind of think, okay, this is crazy. But yeah, he's great. He's great. He's loving life at Arsenal, and, you know, obviously he got a goal the other weekend, which was brilliant. But yeah, he's you know, I think he's really settled in there really well. He seems to, you know, have found a home as such, because after he had quite a few loan moves, like you said, from Real Madrid, and couldn't really find his feet anywhere. But I feel like he's really settled in at Arsenal, and yeah, he's really enjoying it there. And I think he's ready just to make a bit of a name for himself now in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think he's been through so much, and he's still so young. You know, going to Real Madrid at 16 is just unbelievable. And, you know, when you think back to what other people were doing when they're 16, like doing their GCSEs and stuff, it's amazing what he's been through so young. So I think I mean, obviously he plays for Arsenal, you know, don't want them to do well, but it would be nice to see him do well. So I think he's a player that's he's got so much promise and so much potential. In terms, obviously, we're just coming out the other side of the pandemic now. You know, football was very different over the last kind of 18 months. What sort of challenges did kind of the pandemic pose for kind of your side of work? How different did it make it, and how much more difficult was it for you?
I guess when we went into the lockdown, we didn't really know how it would work, and I never thought football would ever get called off. I don't think I ever saw us going into a lockdown, if I'm honest with you. We just worked off of Zoom. Zoom became our best friend in the end. We did, you know, we broadcast shows off of Zoom, and we did all the interviews off of Zoom, you know, especially when there was absolutely no football. Some of the players were doing interviews from their home, which was crazy, because, you know, you're saying to them, are you sure you want that family picture in the background? Yeah, no worries. So it's kind of checking, you know, it was a whole nother ball game as such over the lockdown period. But it was really, for me, it was a massive learning curve of kind of being on my own and not having a camera operator with me and all that kinds of that stuff, and remembering to press record and pin the player and all this kind of stuff. It was a lot to take in as well, because it was all on you. If you didn't press record and you didn't pin the player, the whole recording was just completely messed up. So it's a lot of pressure, but I'm kind of glad I went through that stage as well, because it was such a massive learning curve for me in the end. And I feel like I I really learned a lot within that COVID period and lockdown as well.
Yeah, I think there was a lot to be learned for a lot of people, a lot of industries, etc. And I think football dealt with it really well, kind of in the best way it could, providing, you know, with the likes of, you know, Sky Sports, other sporting outlets, etc., providing a lot of content to kind of keep the fans engaged, because football was off. It was off for a long time, so you know it's a big gap to fill, and with not much going on, it's quite hard to, you know, talk to players about stuff because you kind of run out of ideas. There's not an awful lot going on. They're kind of just doing training at home, and that's about it. It's quite hard to get like content out of that. But yeah, I think everyone did a fantastic job during that time to keep kind of the fans entertained and stuff. Kind of moving on to a kind of last point and quite an important point. Obviously, it's great to see so many more women working in the men's game now. It's not always been that way. It's kind of been a real big push over the last few years to get more women involved in the men's game. You know, the likes of Alex Scott doing stuff with Sky Sports, BBC. You see at BT now, the likes of Emma Hayes. They've got Eni Aluko doing analysis and stuff. How pleased are you to see now that after so long that women are now kind of at the forefront of the men's game as well?
It's really refreshing, and for me personally, I find it really exciting, especially when you kind of tune in on a Sunday, a Saturday, Friday night, even with Kelly Kate. Sometimes it's just refreshing, especially when you hear a female voice and they're fronting the whole thing. I can't even explain the buzz you get from it, because not only is it exciting for them, it's exciting for me, but also exciting for every girl at, you know, university, college, studying some form of sports or broadcasting, or just has that dream to kind of get into football and wanting to share their passion for it.
Yeah, and how have you found it yourself as a woman working in football? Obviously, you've worked in kind of football for a number of years now. Has it? I suppose it hasn't always been how it is. Have you encountered difficulties yourself with working in football as a woman in the early days?
Early days, definitely. Like, I'm sitting in kind of newsrooms, and especially the sport newsrooms, where I was the only girl often, you know, and, you know, you sometimes get asked, you know, do you like football? And you're like, well, I'm not sitting here for fun, am I?
Yeah.
I could be anywhere doing something I really liked. But yeah, but you know, and then you have to kind of explain to them, like, football has been my day one, and you know, and then you take them through like kind of what you've done, and you know, playing football. You know, I did play football for a time at school, a little while, but I was never good. Even playing football at school, that was never ever a thing to be a woman footballer. Like, it was never ever a thing. So, you know, watching girls now play football and saying, you know, I want to be the next English women's footballer is amazing. So we've kind of come a long way in that respect. But I think when I was coming through, it was really tough. And I remember going for interviews, and I was the only girl going for that kind of job, and it was a man's kind of world when I was coming through. But I think women have still got a long way to go in terms of really, you know, massively making more of a breakthrough. But I feel like the last few years, I feel we've just, it has been really game changing. And especially with the Sky Sports obviously now taking the YSL, you know, as soon as the Premier League games are done, you know, maybe on a Sunday, and you get the YSL straight after, and even on a Friday night, I'll tune into that now because it's available for me to watch. And it wasn't really available before.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a massive step in the right direction. I think the women's game is getting a lot more traction behind it, as you were saying. It's now on Sky Sports, it's on BBC. You've got the likes of Ian Wright, who's really championing the women's game, doing a lot of kind of promotion for it as such. How much further do you feel that football's still got to come in terms of kind of women working in the game being kind of fully accepted as such? Do you still feel there's a bit of a gap to breach there, but we're kind of well on the way, would you say?
I think we're well on the way. I think I feel in the workplace I'm completely accepted, which is such a really nice feeling. But there's always that thought in the back of my mind when I go into meetings, or I sit down with, you know, someone else, and I really have to know my stuff, and I really have to have prepared. And I really, you know, sometimes you in human error, you do get things wrong. And when I get do get things wrong, I feel, oh God, they think, it's, me being a woman and not knowing my stuff. So if I go into a meeting or even an interview or anything like that, I make sure I've got prep coming out my ears so that I know that I know every aspect and I've got everything covered, because there is always that doubt in the back of your mind that, you are looked at in a certain way because of your gender. It is horrible still. So I do think we've still got quite a way to go. I mean, I don't know where it's going to go in the future, but it'd just be nice to see more women presenters, I think, and really kind of, headlining the kind of game.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely kind of more work to be done now. Obviously, as you mentioned, Kelly Cates does a great job kind of on Friday Night Football. But it'd be good to see, more people getting involved in that. Last thing on this, how far away do you feel we are from kind of having a first female manager in the men's game? It's Emma Hayes, Chelsea women's manager, kind of been said that she was offered, I think, a job in maybe League One or League Two, which kind of turned down. It's kind of a bit disrespectful to kind of to go in at that lower level as such. Do you feel we're getting closer to that crossover point where we could see a woman coaching in the men's game at a kind of Premier League Championship level?
I think we are. I think we are close. I mean, it's close enough to the fact that we're speaking about it, which years ago we wouldn't have even thought about the idea. But you've got men's in managing and coaching in the women's games. Why can't it be the other way around? I don't think it's far off at all, especially with someone like Emma Hayes, who over the Euros completely took the world by storm pretty much, because everyone was absolutely obsessed with her research and analysis of the game, that they wanted more of her. And then all of a sudden she was pretty much every night on the TV, on ITV in the end. I don't think it's far off. I really don't. I just feel that we should be putting women, when you see the football odds, I feel we should be putting women football managers on there.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, as long as you're good enough for the job and you're qualified enough for the job, where like your background, your gender, etc., it shouldn't be a barrier to entry. Like if you're good enough, it doesn't matter, male, female, where you've come from, if you've got a background in the game or not. It should just be done on, if you're good enough for the job, then you should get those opportunities. I think, there's still a bit of a way to go there, but I think in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, and that sounds like quite a long way, but I'd imagine we'll start seeing more managers in the men's game. So I think that's kind of the next stage now, because the kind of media side of things is gathering momentum. Now I think you might see the likes of more women in the men's game, because you mentioned there's a lot of men managing in the women's game. Kind of seen the likes of Phil Neville managing the women's England side. There's a lot of male managers in the women's Super League, etc. So I don't see no reason why that kind of can't be the same, because whether you're managing women's football or men's football, it's a game of football. The tactics are the same. As long as your knowledge is there, then I don't really see any issues with it. But just to wrap up, just gonna go through a few quick fire questions just about the Premier League this season. We've already touched on your winners. You've picked Chelsea, which is very nice to hear for me personally. Your 3 teams to get relegated.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know at the moment. I mean, if you look at the bottom 3 at the moment, you've got Burnley, Newcastle and Norwich. Burnley and Newcastle, I definitely can't see them being involved in it, because they turned it around last year, and I think Sean Dyche, he speaks for himself. He's been in the game so many years, and Steve Bruce is brilliant. Norwich, I think they might struggle, but I think they might pick up some points somewhere along the line. I generally couldn't tell you who will be relegated this season.
Yeah,
it's such a fight.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think for me, I think Norwich are done. I mean, look, they're a good side. They play nice football. Daniel Farke, good manager. They've got some good young players, but ultimately, every time they come up, they can't seem to bridge the gap in quality from the Championship to the Premier League. They're almost too good for the Championship. Then they're not good enough for the Premier League. They almost need somewhere in between. So for me, I think they're done. I know that's ridiculous after 7 games. I think Watford will join them, because they just change managers left, right, and centre. I don't think Claudio Ranieri will last the rest of the season. I wouldn't be surprised to see a change again. And the last one's tough, because there's a lot of teams down there. The likes of Newcastle's, your Burnleys. hate to say it, and maybe Southampton as well, haven't won a game yet. I mean, I think there's probably 3 teams worse than them, but you know, when you've not won in your first 7, it's never a great start. I think it's going to be Burnley. I think the bottom 3 as they are will probably go down, having survived for so long, Burnley, every year, just getting away with it. You can't keep doing that. So yeah, I'll go with those 3. And then final one then, Golden Boot winner for this season. I know we're kind of a few games in, but it's fairly close at the top. I think Salah and Vardy are top at the moment with 6 goals apiece.
God, that's tough, isn't it? Mo Salah.
Yeah.
He's amazing, isn't he? Like, I have him in my fantasy football team every season since he joined the Premier League, and he's never let me down.
No, I think he's a surefire bet for guaranteed points in the fantasy. Yeah, I think it's hard to look past Mo Salah. I mean, I did predict Romelu Lukaku at the start of the season. I'll stick with that, but he's probably got to bag a few more. Chelsea have got to play more to his strengths to see him work his way out the charts. And it's quite surprising that after 7 games, Harry Kane still hasn't got a Premier League goal yet. So he's normally up there, but maybe he's left himself with a little bit too much to do there. But yeah, that brings up full time on another episode of the Blues Brothers podcast. A massive thank you to the guest Rebecca for joining me. Before we finish up, where can people find out more about you? You know, they want to see more of the work you're doing, etc. Obviously, you mentioned it's not broadcast in the UK, but in terms of kind of like social media and stuff, where's the best place for people to come and find you?
I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and my Twitter is Rebecca_L_Coles, and my Instagram is Rebecca Louise Coles. So yeah, I update both pretty regularly. So yeah, you can find me on there.
Perfect. So guys, yeah, make sure you check those out. Yeah, once again, thanks very much for your time. Some great insight, and we will catch you in the next episode, guys. Thank you.